Well, thank you and good afternoon. I think my topic is building a sustainable brand. And I think that will come out of my presentation, I hope. I've now been involved in this industry for 23 years legally, maybe a couple of years before that. And I can reflect back on my time in the industry. My stories could be called, "Be careful what you wish for, it just might happen." I've often I went to call the paper one day, "A Day on the Bog" with Bill Lark, and people looked at me rather strangely, so I changed that. We're lucky enough to own our own peat bog up in the Highlands, but people are a bit nervous when you talk about spending the day on the bog. But our story really is one of, I knew I liked drinking single malt whisky back in the 80s. I had absolutely no idea how to make it. And it was one of those chance occasions where my wife's father, Max, God bless his soul, had introduced me to both whisky and fly fishing. And on a particular day back in the late 80s, we caught a beautiful 4-pound brown trout early one Sunday morning. Max thought it would be a good idea if we phoned Lynn and Margaret, our wives, and asked them to come up to the Highlands and we'd barbecue the trout. And I thought that was a lovely idea, so we drove back into Bothwell in the Central Highlands and we phoned Lynn and Margaret and they said yes, they joined us. Going back to meet Max at the little park in Bothwell, I thought, oh, what are we going to do now for an hour and a half while the girls come up to Bothwell? Max had a big smile on his face and a bottle of Glenfiddich whisky sitting on the table. He'd worked this out pretty well. We now had 2 cars and 2 drivers. And we settled into that bottle of malt whisky. And I knew in Tasmania we had good barley, good water. I suspected the climate was right. As a surveyor, I knew there were peat bogs further up the road. And I just said to Max, it seems that we've got everything you need to make malt whisky. I wonder why somebody hasn't done it. And it was one of those silly little things you say. And later that week, I was in my branch office down the Huon, and I used to finish the day up by going and having a beer with a local bottle shop owner, Boney. And I was in there one Thursday afternoon and I said to Boney, looking around his shop, "You've got some wonderful products in here, Boney, but nothing from Tasmania. I wonder why that is." And Boney said, "Well, look, I don't know, Bill, but just a moment." He got on the phone and phoned up an old chap, Fred, up the road, who used to work for Glenfarclas Distillery. Fred said, "Send Bill around and I'll have a chat to him." I remember driving around to Fred's place. As I got there, Fred was opening the door and at the same time opening a brand new bottle of Cardew, which we polished off in the course of his telling me about his time at Glenfarclas, where he was company bondsman. At the end of that bottle, he said to me, "Bill, you shouldn't be just talking to me. Go and talk to my son. He worked for a company in Scotland that makes stills." And so I went and spoke to his son, who opened another bottle of whisky, and we started drinking more whisky. And this went on, and I just found that I got swept up in a wave of enthusiasm by people wanting to see if Tasmania could make whisky. And it was, again, just one of those things that was all getting quite exciting, and I didn't have a clue how to make it. I still only enjoyed drinking it. And then again, by chance, one night, my mother-in-law was reading out an auction notice in the paper that was talking about mahogany tables, bentwood chairs and copper pot whisky stills, and I stopped her and said, "Margaret, what was that?" We read it again and I said, "Well, come on, Margaret, we're going to this auction and I'm going to buy that whatever it takes." And I went to this auction with Margaret, and for $65 I made my first investment in our distillery. I now had a still. I still had no idea how to make whisky. I took myself up to, I'd started reading a little bit by then and discovered it was made from malted barley, yeast and water, and I knew Cascade dealt with malted barley and made a pretty good beer. So I went up to see Ken Holmes, the head brewer at the time up at Cascade, told him what I wanted to do. They thought it was a fantastic idea. He stopped the production run of 100,000 litres of whatever it was he was making and filled up an 80-litre vat for me of hot wort and gave me some yeast, told me what to do, go to a homebrew shop, buy a airlock and take it home, ferment it and then put it through my little $65 still. I did that and it actually didn't taste too bad. And I thought, this is pretty exciting. I wonder, you know, what would happen if we sort of played around a little bit more. And I got a little 5 litre barrel and filled that up. And very quickly I discovered that I think we had all the right ingredients for making whisky. But I was getting a bit concerned that a few people around the neighbourhood knew that I was playing with a still. And I thought, if this is going to ever get serious, I'd better go to Customs and apply for a licence. And I'm telling you this because really, back in those days, prior to 1992, Australia had a number of distilleries, but they were all very large-scale distilleries. We all know of Bundaberg and Tarak, and Hardy's had a few big stills. When I went to apply for my licence, I went in, woke all the boys up in the Customs office, and they asked me what I wanted, and I said I'd like a licence to make whisky. Well, they jumped out of their chairs, they made me a cup of tea, the whole office came around, and we started going through the Distillation Act of 1901. And what had happened in Australia, I certainly know back in colonial Tasmanian days, we had 6 licensed distilleries, 7 licensed distilleries in Hobart from 1822 to 1839, and there's a whole other story if I had a day to tell you about it. It was fascinating, but we ended up with Governor John Franklin in office. His wife was a teetotal, and by 1839 his wife had conspired with de Graves, who set up Cascade Brewery, to convince Governor John Franklin that Hobart would be a better place if everybody stopped drinking the local whisky and drank Peter de Graves beer. So in 1839 he prohibited distilling in Tasmania. And then in Federation, Australia adopted pretty much the Scottish Act. It was called in Australia the Distillation Act of 1901. And nobody back in those days had really heard about boutique wineries, boutique breweries, let alone boutique distilleries. And so the Act was pretty much designed to discourage backyard operation and encourage large industrial size operations. And so when I went in to see Customs, they were very excited, but there was no exception to the rule. Unless I built an enormous size still, there was no opportunity for me to get a licence. There was no such thing as an experimenter's licence. And I certainly didn't have the money to build a big operation like that. I just simply wanted to see if Australia or Tasmania could produce a good single malt whisky. So I came away from that. I think probably the boys in the Customs offices were more disappointed than I was. And I thought that'd be the end of it. I'll go home and I'll pack my little still up, and I've had a bit of fun. That's okay. But by chance again, I was walking through Hobart one day and I noticed our local federal member, Duncan Kerr, was in his office. I didn't know him, and I thought there's no harm in asking. I went in and introduced myself to his secretary, who said, yeah, I think Duncan would like to talk to you. She knew he liked whisky. I went in and sat down with Duncan, and he did like whisky. And I told him what the problem was, and he said, well, just a minute, let me get on to my mate in Canberra, who was then Barry Jones, the Minister for Customs, Science and Small Business, who also liked whisky. And during that phone conversation, Barry said, send me a letter and I'll respond to it, but in the meantime, tell Bill to go back and apply for his licence. I will change or amend the regulations to the Distillation Act of 1901 to allow small distilleries. So I can tell you, in May 1992, we were lucky enough to receive the first licence, certainly in Tasmania since 1839, and arguably in Australia, to operate a small distillery. As Stuart mentioned this morning, there are something like 55 small distilleries around Australia now. That makes me very proud to see the way this industry has grown in Australia, to have been part of that right at the start. But it was one thing to have a licence. I still didn't know how to make whisky, and we had to learn. And one of the great things I've discovered about this industry is that within 2 weeks of me getting my licence, John Grant from Glenfarclas Distillery in Scotland phoned me at 10 o'clock at night out of the blue and introduced himself over the phone, and I'm going like, John, this is amazing, how can I help you? And he goes, no, Bill, please let me help you. I've heard you've got a licence to make whisky in Australia. Please let me help you make good whisky. And we talked about a lot of things. I said, John, listen, this is quite amazing. One of the things I was dead afraid of was that you might poo-poo this silly colonial that thought he could make whisky in Australia. I've always loved my Scottish malts, and I always will. And all I wanted to do, John, is see if I could make a Tasmanian malt, and I really appreciate your offer of help. And he said, well, Bill, let me tell you, he said, the reason I'm doing it is because if somebody comes to your distillery and it's their first experience of whisky, I would like it to be a good experience rather than a bad one. So please let me help you. And I know Kathleen mentioned that I've been happy to help other people, and I think it's because of that conversation that night with John Grant, how wonderful they've been. And I know Pat Maguire's in the back there, he can tell you many, many stories of the Scottish industry helping us and helping our industry grow. And I felt an obligation, for one, and a true desire to see our industry grow, but grow with people wanting to make good whisky around Australia. So all of that happened in May 1992. We had a licence, had no idea what we were doing. We just started playing. And chance plays an amazing part in our life. I had a very busy land surveying practice. Patrick Maguire from Sullivan's Cove and myself and two other mates and our families had built and were running a pub in a ski field in Tasmania. Our lives were pretty complicated at the time. But at that stage, we still just simply wanted to see if Australia or Tasmania was capable of making good single malt whisky. And while I was surveying, my wife would play with us still. And she developed a product. She was wanting to make a gin way back then. And she was looking at all the different botanicals that would go into a gin. And she was encouraged to use the Tasmanian native botanical, the Tasmania lanceolata or aromatica, commonly known as the pepperberry. And she phoned me up one day and in my survey office said, "Bill, you better come home quick." And I thought, "Oh, what have you done, blown the still up?" And she said, no, I've been playing around with these pepperberries. I think it's going to make a sensational drink. And so I came home and just hit by this wonderful explosion of amazing botanical flavours and all coming from this pepperberry. And so Lynn went on to develop a product we initially called the Bush Liqueur. At that stage, we had no intention still of starting a business. We were simply playing. Lynn showed that at a craft show at Deloraine in 1996, and she went on to show it at the Taste of Tasmania. A journalist from the Sydney Morning Herald discovered it, went home without telling us, put a half-page story in the Sydney Morning Herald the next morning. Our phone just started ringing flat out and never stopped to this day. And that turned our lives around. And from there, we found ourselves being interrupted at tea time with people knocking on the door, coming from all over Australia, wanting to see the Lark Distillery and see this bush liqueur that Lynn was making. And so in 1997, we decided we needed to move it out of home, and we set up our first cellar door. Still, one of the things that concerned me was that, and I'll try and get to the point about building a sustainable brand, was that we knew that we were up against the likes of the big multinational liquor companies, Diageo, Pernod Ricard, Moët Hennessy. How the hell were we ever going to be able to make a product that would even have any hope of competing against them in the marketplace? Their budgets for marketing are frightening. We had nothing, no money. We started our business with $65, and the other thing I didn't tell you was we said to ourselves, this business is going to survive on cash flow. We've got other businesses that we've got money in. We're not going to put any more money into this than the $65. And so I can tell you, for 21 years, we ran and built the Lark Distillery on cash flow only. We never had an overdraft. We still don't have an overdraft. We did it the nail-bitingly scary way. And against that, I thought, the only way we might have a chance of ever competing in that same space alongside these big liquor companies, and I love all the products they make and the rest of it, was simply to do our best to make a good product and not even think about putting it on the marketplace until personally we were both, Lynn and myself, happy with what we were making. We thought if we did that, one day other people might like it. And then one day, maybe some of these outlets that we would have loved our product to be in, they might even ask to have it in their product list. And so we went along quietly with no intention to create a business. In fact, we said to ourselves right at the start, the last thing we need is another business. This pub is consuming us, the surveying practice is very busy. Let's just plod along and see what happens. And so we opened up some commercial premises in 1997, and we released our first whisky in 1998. And at that stage, we sort of used this cellar door. At that stage, we'd still never approached a distributor. We'd never approached anybody else to sell our products. We only had the bush liqueur and by then apple schnapps, and we'd just released our first whisky. We still weren't game to approach anybody. We thought they'll think we're some sort of novelty or curiosity. We wanted to be sure before we approached anybody that it wasn't just us that liked our product, that other people liked it. So having a cellar door really put us at the coalface with the consumer. And I remember one day after releasing our first whisky, a Scottish bloke came into our cellar door at Richmond, and he looked at me and he said, "What's this you're doing? You're not making whisky, are you?" And I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I am." And he said, "Well, you better give me a taste of it then." And I said, "Look, I'm really sorry, I only have a small amount. I can sell you a taste for $3. Oh, he said, $3? All right, you better give me a taste. And so, sell me a taste. So I poured him a little taste. I got his $3. He went straight to the back door and I thought he was going to spit it out. And his wife was out in the courtyard, and next minute he's screaming out, "Mary, Mary, come in here. They're making whisky, and it's not bad." And he bought 3 bottles. And I thought, I think maybe we can make malt whisky. He was a bloke prepared to be fairly sceptical about what we were doing, and he bought 3 bottles. And at that stage, I felt we were on the right track, that we may have actually created a product that somebody will want to buy. We may have even started to create a brand. I knew nothing about marketing. I knew nothing about business. I was just a land surveyor. I've never considered myself a business person, but I thought if we just keep going along these lines, maybe one day things will progress and grow. And they did. Other distilleries started coming along, and I'm pleased to say and proud of the fact that we helped people when they asked for our help. In fact, we started a distillery school to help other distillers that wanted to come into this industry. And to this day, we still do. We still help people wanting to start a distillery. And what we've noticed and seen is that by helping other people in the industry and encouraging them to also make good product, our industry has grown to become a product that is known now throughout the world. Sullivan's Cove last year picked up an award for the best whisky in the world. How great was that to be able to say when somebody asked, "Where does the best whisky in the world come from?" Tasmania. That was fantastic. You're a bit of a bugger though, Patrick, because now we're all run out of whisky and we're struggling. But it goes back to about 2009 when I think Sullivan's Cove and Lark had won awards in the World Whisky Awards for the best other whisky outside of Scotland and Ireland and the major markets. And there was a particular writer in the United Kingdom at the time by the name of Ian Buxton that had been watching the emergence of these Australian spirits and writing up in Whisky Magazine. Well, he wasn't too bad, but he was always a bit sceptical about these New World whiskies. And so whenever I saw those articles, I would tell people what I thought about Ian Buxton and his writings until we won this award. And I was at a dinner not long after that award in Scotland, and I noticed in the crowd Ian Buxton, and he's looking through the crowd and he noticed me, and he came up and introduced himself. And he said, "Bill, I'm Ian Buxton. You may have seen some of the things I've written about Australian whisky." And I said, "Yes, Ian." I said, "You probably know a little bit about some of the things I've been saying about you." And he said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "But I was a judge in that competition." And he said, "I've got to say, you thoroughly deserve to win that award. What are you bastards doing in Tasmania? How can you make such a good whisky?" And it was just another one of those. We talked about how did we make such good whisky in Tasmania. It was just another one of those things. When I wanted some malted barley, I didn't know that there were different strains around the world. I just went to my local brewer, Cascade, and I got the malted barley that they made on the premises. And the lucky thing about that was that it produces a very big, rich, oily malt, unlike the sort of whiskies they've been seeing in Scotland for a long time. Their industry has got so big, they've developed strains of barley that give a much higher yield of alcohol, still producing sensational whiskies, but just not the same as they used to be. Yet here we were using a traditional barley, getting way less alcohol per tonne of barley than they were, but giving the consumer something they wanted. So that was really quite a defining moment, I think, for us at Lark and for the Tasmanian industry. We knew that we could now compete on the world stage. I look back over the years and think about how did we end up where we have ended up? As I said, Sullivan's Cove winning the best whisky in the world. We picked up an award in the United States for the best cask strength whisky in the world in the same year. The awards go on and on. All of the distilleries that are on Kathleen's books and around Australia, those that have product in the marketplace are winning some of the top awards around the world. It says heaps for us. I think when I look back and I think on how do you build a brand, sure, people can come out into the marketplace and they can build a brand very quickly. We've heard that today. And they can build good brands. But it takes time and it takes money. We didn't have money, we had time. One of the things that I like about the way we've done it, the fact that it's taken us 23 years, is that I believe along the way, the fact that we didn't rush it, we wanted to make sure we had a product that people liked. We wanted to make sure that we built up loyalty with our customer. One of the things that I was lucky enough to be presented to when I started was from the guy that made Jack Daniel's the brand name that it is today. When they started out in America, they'd been around for a long time and they were quite successful in America, but when they wanted to get bigger, they were then up against the likes of Jim Beam. And Jim Beam's approach to taking on the market was to spend a lot of money on advertising. And Jack Daniel's had come up with a concept they called the illusion of discovery. When Jim Beam had full-page ads in the paper, Jack Daniel's in the same paper would put a little column about 2 inches high and 1 inch wide that didn't even have their name on it. It just had a tiny image of their bottle and it had a story. On Saturday, it is our secretary's son's birthday and all of the staff at Jack Daniel's will be going to such and such a park to celebrate his birthday. That was it. Jim Beam's got a big ad, Jack Daniel's got this tiny little ad story, not an ad, a story down the bottom. And people would look at that story and go, what the hell is that? Who are they? And they would go out to discover who they were. And I sort of liken that to, I like my fly fishing and I was shown a wonderful little spot down in the Huon on this terrific little river that no one knew about except this mate of mine who now showed me. But don't tell anyone, Bill, please don't tell anyone. And so another very good friend of mine who I knew would appreciate this spot was looking for somewhere to fish, and I said, well, look, I'll take you down and show you this spot, but really you can't tell anyone about this spot. This is like Glenn's spot, and now this is our spot. So he came down and he had a great day. He went home and he told his son about it, and his son told his mates about it, and his mates told half of Hobart about it, because the next time I went down, there were cars up and down the road, and my favourite little fishing spot everybody had discovered. And it was this thing that Jack Daniel's had discovered, this it's called the illusion of discovery. But the other thing I learnt about their story was that if any of you were to go over there today and walk in unannounced and ask to see the manager of Jack Daniel's, he would drop his pen straight away. If he's on the phone, he would put the phone down and he would come and see you. He would make himself available to you because you were interested in them. And so right at the start, when I knew we didn't have any money for marketing, I could let people discover us. That might work for us. And I love giving my time to people. I would be more than happy to do that. And so I adopted that approach too, that if anybody came and wanted to speak to me or see me, any time of day or night, on the weekend, I've been in on Boxing Day to talk to people. I'm happy to do that. I can do that. I don't have the money or the marketing budget of these big companies, but I can talk to people. And we found that as our business was growing, it was very easy to market to the tourist market, the visitor market. That was dead easy. We did spend a tiny little bit of money on advertising in those tourist publications that were important. But we struggled really getting the local market to accept us for a long time. And we tried advertising on radio and we tried all manner of things and it wasn't working. And so one of the things we decided to do, and it's interesting because Stuart talked about sponsorship, and in his approach of doing it in this short time, it wasn't working for him. But what we did was sponsored things like the Derwent class sailing regatta. There's about half a dozen yachts in this class. We would sponsor that, but we had the opportunity of coming along and sitting on one of these boats during the race and drinking with the crews at the presentation while we handed over bottles of whisky as prizes. We sponsored local music groups. Musica Viva and a whole host of local rowing clubs and things. But we didn't just sponsor and leave it at that. We actually got involved in it. I still love it, being part of all of these things that we sponsored. And I figured, why give money to a big publication company? Nobody's going to read my ad, but I can not only involve myself with the local community, I can enjoy it at the same time, and I can help local community groups that need help. And I found in a very short period of time the local community loved us and started to adopt us and become proud of what we were doing. And so, I look back at that again and I think in building a brand, there's something about building it over time and building it with honest passion for what you're doing and commitment to the people that are going to be your customers. And what I found from that was that those people that we were helping then became ambassadors for Lark, and they became rusted onto our brand. And without having to spend money, I had people running all around the country promoting our product for us. And all of a sudden, restaurants in Sydney and Melbourne that I would have loved to have been in years before and used to sort of poo-poo us, they were now ringing us up saying, what's this about this Lark whisky I've heard about, can I get some? And it changed for us. It might have taken 20 odd years, but I believe we've built up a loyalty amongst our customers that will be rusted on for life. I think we've built up a brand that is now sustainable for a long time. I've been around in surveying and running pubs on Ben Lomond and all manner of things to see businesses come and go, brands come and go into this market. They come in, they spend a lot of money, they come in with a flurry of fanfare and razzmatazz, and 2 or 3 years later they're gone. What I'd like to think is that we've actually built up a brand. It hasn't cost us a lot of money, it's taken time, but I firmly believe we've built up a brand that will now be sustainable long into the future. Tourism is another area that we've discovered. We used to be able to promote to visitors from interstate and from overseas that wanted to know about our product. That was easy. But what we started to discover also was that people wanted to know more about how our whisky was made. And I'd been on enough tours of big distilleries to know that I was frustrated in being told to follow a yellow line and we'll show you this and show you that and you can get a little taste at the end of it. I had so many questions I wanted to ask but didn't get an opportunity. So some time ago we took the opportunity to set up tours where effectively people can come into our distillery and make a whisky themselves. We get them to stir the mash in the mash tun, to drink out of the mash tun, to take a sample of the wort coming from the fermenter, right through to actually taking a little taste of the spirit coming off the still. Nowhere else in the world was doing that. And through that, we found those people just simply had to be part of our distillery and part of our product and part of our story, and would go away and talk about it to other people. And so our brand has just grown and grown through word of mouth. Again, we really didn't spend money on it. We just spent time with the people that wanted to come and see us and to help them understand what it is we do. There's probably a lot of other things I've forgotten to talk about. I didn't prepare any notes. I'm not very good on PowerPoint. I've just wanted to relay to you the sort of the history of the whisky industry, where it started from very humble beginnings to this wonderful industry we've got now happening around Australia. I only wish people like Kathleen had been around when I started. We didn't have a clue. Didn't have a clue how to make it, didn't have a clue how to sell it. But one of the other things we did do was to involve the people that came to work with us as part of our family. We felt like we'd been taken in by the Scottish family. There's not a distillery I can't go to in Scotland where it's like, Bill, come in, it's an open distillery, you don't need us to show you around, there's no secrets, go for your life, and they really do treat us as part of their wonderful family. And one of the things that we felt, we didn't have money for marketing, so Lynn and I could run around and talk about our distillery, but if we could involve our staff or have our staff enjoy or pick up on that passion, then that would also be very important to us. So I was talking with Jane over there earlier today, and one of the things as we started, people used to think I was quite slack because I used to like to get to work early. But as people started to arrive, as staff members started to arrive, I used to turn the coffee machine on and make them a coffee. And I didn't mind if we sat there for an hour talking about the football, how well Collingwood did. I know Stuart's gone, so I can talk about them now. And it didn't matter what we talked about. I just got to know the people that worked with us that helped us. And eventually we would start talking about the issues of the day and challenges that we were going to meet, and eventually we'd all go off to our desks and the distills and different parts of the business. And I just found that to be a tremendous help to us in building our brand again, because now our staff, whenever they're anywhere, they're talking with passion. They own our distillery, they own our business, they own our brand. It's not something I've learnt from Marketing 101 or building a brand. It's something I can only now look back on after 23 years and think to myself, I think we've actually built a brand. I think we've built one that's going to be around for a long time. I certainly hope so. Today for me has been terrific. I wasn't sure quite what to expect when I was coming here today, but I've heard some fantastic people talking with passion about just what I've been talking about. We've heard it all before today, but it's this having a story, believing in that story, and sharing that story with anybody that'll listen. It's given me a lot of joy and a lot of pleasure. I've been lucky enough, our business has grown to the point where I was able to step back a little bit from it a couple of years ago, and we've recapitalised. We're going into a new era now, changing from a family business to a corporate structure. That'll be an interesting time to see how we can transition from that. But I've just written my business card now. I'm the global brand ambassador and loving every minute of it. So I've had a great day today, and I hope you all have. I'd actually like you all to share with me and congratulate all the other speakers that we've heard today. I've just been so inspired by all of the speakers today. I've had a great time, and I want to thank them. I'm sorry, Sid, if I stole your thunder.